Here are your hosts, Lark and AJ.
Joining us live in studio tonight is a man who is a film writer, director, an author, a newspaper columnist. Back in the day is his weekly column that appears in 11 newspapers on Long Island, as well as papers in New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, Florida, and believe it or not, Italy. The topics are wide-ranging and have included articles about his family, sports, history, entertainment, and popular culture, to name just a few. He's written several books as well. Tonight we highlight one of those books, Gil Hodges, The Quiet Man, the new commemorative edition. I was so moved by the book, rather than just do one segment on it, we're going to center our whole show around it. It's my pleasure to welcome Marino Amoruso to Sports Talk New York. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And it's beautiful because you're here from Long Island, so it's great to have you live here in studio. The book, to me, seems as much a tribute as well as a plea for Gil Hodges to be in the Hall of Fame, but it also seems that it's a tribute to your dad and what the Dodgers meant to him and what Gil represented as a human being. So could you tell our audience what inspired you? Because you're only a few years older than I am and younger than AJ, but everyone's younger than AJ. And Gil Hodges' playing days, you basically got to see maybe 53 games of Gil Hodges' career as a very young boy. So what inspired you about Gil Hodges to do this book?
Well, my father took me to my first game at the Polo Grounds. I was a little kid, and his favorite player had been Gil Hodges because he had been a Dodger fanatic, and so naturally I became a Gil Hodges fanatic. And I went to the Polo Grounds. I had a Mets uniform with number 14 on it. I'm sitting by the railing by the Mets dugout. Gil sees me and comes over, and I always say to this day, I did a Ralph Cramden. I didn't know, I mean, he's my hero. He's standing in front of me, and he spent a lot of time with me, and, and he's asking me questions which I couldn't answer. My father kept answering for me. And finally, I said, I finally blurted out at the end that he signed my yearbook, and he was so nice to me. I finally blurted out, Gil, you're my favorite player. And he looked at me and goes, you're my favorite fan. And I'm 5 years old. Can you reach a higher height as a 5-year-old baseball fan than that? And then 8 years later, my first hero of my life comes back and leads my favorite team, the heretofore incredibly bad Mets, to a Miracle World Championship. If you wrote that as a screenplay, Hollywood would reject it as being too contrived. And so I always felt this connection to him. Then he passed away when I was 15 years old, and it was like somebody in the family, even though I never met him twice, it felt like somebody in the family had died. And then as I got older and I read about the type of man he was, his character, his strength, he was a war hero, I said, my God, this is not just a great ball player, this is a great man, period.
It's interesting also because I was reading this over the last month or two, and of course during the last month or two, a lot of the stories about baseball, about biogenesis, and you read that chapter about your first game, and that particular moment, the way you describe walking out, like, that you had only seen baseball on a black and white TV, and just walking out to the field and seeing it for the first time, really to me is what baseball really is about. So can you take us back to that day and your first experience of actually seeing, because you talked about, early on in life, the 62 Mets, how, your dad would knock on the, did they win, you'd be in the bathroom, win or lose, and they lost.
They lost, yeah.
But take us back to that feeling you got, that first time when you actually walked into a ballpark.
Well, up until that point, I had seen every Met game on a black and white Motorola in our Brooklyn row house there. And when I came out of the tunnel in the Polo Grounds, we walked through the tunnel, it was dark. And it was like, in movies when you see a magnificent scene, you hear trumpets? That's what it felt like. I was like 5 years old, and all of a sudden I realized it's in color. It never dawned on me.
The world was in color.
Everything's in color. And the grass was so green, and the Polo Grounds was huge. It was like a bathtub. And it was
an absolutely weird stadium.
It was so far out to center field.
Yeah.
It was like in another county. And the colors of the uniforms, the Cubs had on their gray road uniforms with the blue, and the Mets with the bright orange, and just everything just hit me at 5 years old. I was in absolute awe. And I swear to this day, and I should be cynical, and I've been through it all, and I've seen a lot of stuff, and I've hung with ball players now, and all that stuff. But every time I walk out onto a field, and now I'm lucky I get to walk through the press gate, actually onto the field sometimes, I still get that feeling, a little bit of that feeling, that trumpet-like feeling. But then I start to think about A-Rod and stuff like that, and it kind of takes it away. And it brings me back to Gil Hodges.
But you still hear the trumpets. But
I still hear the trumpets, but it's like,
But it's
oh,
taps.
what has happened here, you know?
So you talk comparing one era to the other. You talk in one sense about A-Rod and Gil Hodges. So let's play a little what if for a second. What you know from your research about Gil Hodges, how do you think he would have reacted to the whole steroid situation? How he would have reacted to the fact that somebody was suspended, but appealing suspension, so he's available for the lineup?
He wouldn't have been in the lineup. I mean, this is a man who walked out to left field during the championship season. And
Middle of the game, yeah.
Not only the National League's leading hitter, but the guy who was leading the major leagues in hitting, walked all the way out to left field, took him out of the game. I've never seen that before, and I don't think anybody's ever seen it since. I mean, he had a standard, and everybody who played for him knew the standards he lived by. And if you cheated or anything like that, or you could not give your best, you would not play for Gil Hodges. One thing about Gil is he had standards in his life and in his career as a ball player manager that he absolutely lived by. And there was no breaking those standards for any reason, not even a ball game.
Now, the book also makes a very compelling argument as to why Gil should be in the Hall of Fame.
Don't get me started on that.
But interestingly enough, I go out to games, I cover the games.
Yeah.
I did not know about what tremendous politics goes on in the Veterans Committee. So could you tell our listeners a little bit about the Veterans Committee and why they have not gotten Gil in to this point?
Well, first of all, I mean, Gil got more votes than anybody in the history of the game when he was on the writers' ballot, who's not in the Hall of Fame. So that tells you something right there. When he went into the Veterans Committee, who at the time was 15 ex-players, executives, writers, who was supposed to put in people who were overlooked. I found out over the years as I was working with Mrs. Hodges, who I've become very close with, to try and get Gil in. I became very close to some of the members of the Veterans Committee, and I was absolutely shocked at the politics, the personal prejudices, the deal making that went on in this 15-man committee, in which I never said anything because things were told to me in confidence. But I thought it's been 40 years. Gil is still on the outside looking in, and it's time. So in the new intro to the book, I bring some of these up. For example, there was one instance where Stan Musial and Ted Williams got together. They were both very good friends with the second baseman on their team, Bobby Dorr, Red Shandies, and they wanted him in the Hall. So basically, Ted said to Stan, "You help get my guy in, I'll help you get your guy in." Well, Dorr went in first, followed by Shandies. I mean, the proof is right there. The other thing that happened was Ted Williams, for some reason, is the only man in the history of baseball who held a grudge against Gil Hodges. As we all know, Teddy was maybe the greatest hitter of all time, but also had the ego size of Montana. And the fact that Gil was such a better manager than him in Washington, and the writers pointed that out, rubbed Ted the wrong way. So he constantly tried to influence the writers against Gil Hodges. And there's no question he kept him out for many years. And he was a very American League guy. And then the final straw was the last year of the 15-member Veterans Committee, they put in Bill Mazeroski. Fine ball player, maybe the greatest defensive second baseman of all time, is not a Hall of Famer. And what happened was Joe Brown, who was the chairman of the Veterans Committee at that time, wanted Mazeroski in, so he made a deal. Look, we'll put Bill in this year, we put Gil in next year. Unfortunately, the press, the fans are so outraged that Mazeroski was put in the Hall that the Hall of Fame itself, no, we got to change this because everybody's on to us now. And so Gil got passed over again. And it goes on and on and on. Then there were writers, especially from Philadelphia and New York, who kind of had Second City syndrome. That like another Giant, another Dodger, another Yankee, another New York guy in the Hall of Fame. So they voted against him because of that, ignoring baseball history that the Giants, the Dodgers, and the Yankees kind of dominated the 20th century, so they would naturally have the most Hall of Famers.
So walk us through a little bit of how the committee changed and how that was supposed to correct that and actually help Gil Hodges get in.
Well, it actually didn't. What they did was after they abolished the 15-man committee, they instituted a system where all living Hall of Famers voted, and you had to get 75% of the vote. And basically what the Hall of Fame did is they handed the living members a statue. Now, you know, Gil's statistics are borderline, but if you add everything else in, he's...
he's light on average, but probably okay on power numbers.
Well, look, when he retired, he was the leading right-handed home run hitter in National League history. 14 Grand Slams. I mean, all the titles that he led, he was an integral part of as a manager and a player. But the younger players don't know this. The Carlton Fisks of the world, the Mike Schmidt, all they see is 300 some odd home runs. And this is during the steroid era when guys were hitting that many in 3 seasons, you know. Right. So that worked against him. Plus, a lot of the guys who did vote for him, who were of the World War II generation, passed away. Pee Wee passed away, Warren Spahn. These guys all would vote for Gil. And so that kind of worked against them. And so that system didn't work. And so then after 2 years, they changed it, and now they have these committees, the Golden Era Committee, the Negro League Committee, and then in this last election, they put in Ron Santo, which is just, maybe Santo is a Hall of Famer, but he, as a player, as a person, in terms of contributions to baseball, he's not even in Gil's league. How they put him in ahead of Gil is beyond, well, it's not beyond me. I know the reasons. Well,
his son made the DVD, and he actively campaigned while he was still alive on
Oh, my
WGN
God.
every day, and years, you know, they kept
Also-
on righting a wrong.
What happened was Santo did something Gil would never do. He campaigned for himself for years. The Cub franchise was a PR machine to get Ron Santo into the Hall of Fame. Meanwhile, the two organizations Gil was associated with were on the verge of bankruptcy. You know, the Dodgers because of Frankie McCourt and the Mets because of Bernie Madoff. So when I spoke to the PR offices and said, let's do something for Gil, they were like, we got bigger problems than that, you know. So now you got the Cubs. Also, understand, it's like everything else in this world, especially in sports, comes down to the money. They had put somebody like Ron Santo in. All the Cub legends are going to show up. Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Ferguson Jenkins. They're going to get a massive attendance, have a very lucrative Cub Fest weekend when Santo's in. If you put Gil in, none of the Dodger legends are alive. Snyder's gone, Reese gone, Raps, and all of them. And if you were 10 years old when the Dodgers left Brooklyn, you're 70 now. So there's the
You're not
fan
going
base.
up to Cooperstown,
You're not
right.
going up to Cooperstown.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so all these things played again, and when you take into consideration the criteria, individual performance, Gil and Ron have about the same statistics, except Gil was the dominant first baseman of his era. Ron was not even close to being the dominant third baseman. Contribution to teams, let's see, Gil contributed to 12 titles overall. And how many did Santo win? Let's check the record book on that one.
and lost to
play-
Gil's
And
team.
lost to Gil,
Yeah.
right?
Let's play what if for a second. What if he hadn't died so young and he had stayed to manage and been successful as a manager? How do you think that might have affected, his chances of getting into?
I
if
think
he'd been around.
if he had not died, he'd be in right now, without a question. It's a lot of times it's out of sight, out of mind, and that's exactly what happened to Gil. Not that he would have campaigned, but him being around and him going on as a manager, he was a brilliant manager. He definitely would be in right now. The saddest thing about this, I've become very close to Joan Hodges over the last 20 years of doing the book and working with her every year to try and get Gil in. And when I first met Joan, she's Joan Lombardi from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. She reminded me of my mother. She's an Italian lady from Brooklyn. I was like, oh my God. And she just wants the recognition for Gil of, this was not a very good ball player. This was a Hall of Fame player, and this is a Hall of Fame man. And every year, when he did not get in, it just broke my heart. She would call me up, and I didn't know what to say to her. And we worked so hard, and I would really like to see this happen this year, as much as I want Gil in the Hall of Fame, and millions of other fans do, because it is the single greatest injustice in the history of the Hall of Fame that he is not in. Just so Joan can have that one thing. I mean, she's 87 years old,
You talk about his contributions to the game and his team, and you take a look at the events of this past week, the vandalism of the Pee Wee Reese and Jackie Robinson statue.
Unbelievable.
Now, with the movie 42, people that might not have known the Pee Wee Reese story know what Pee Wee meant to Jackie. However, the reason why that's such an important moment is because of where Pee Wee came from and the bigotry that he grew up surrounding
in Kentucky, right?
In Kentucky,
Right.
and where that game took place. However, people might not know this, that Gil really was the guy who befriended Jackie and really was the guy who Jackie looked to, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Jackie said many times that Gil was the heart of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he depended on him. He knew he could count on him. And when Jackie first came on the team, they were the Hodges were the first family that actually invited him over for dinner, socialized with them, made them feel part of the team. Because Gil understood how much of an outsider Jackie felt like at that time. So, they would have them over for Sunday macaroni, Joan would be Italian, and even Rachel said this, that, we became very friendly with them, and they made us feel so comfortable. But Gil was not the kind of guy who would go and publicize that. He did it not for the publicity, a lot like Pee Wee. He did it because he knew it was the right thing to do. And when you do the right thing, you don't go out and get publicity and brag about it. You just do the right thing. And that's the story of his life. He always did what he thought was the right thing without any of the fanfare that is usually associated with that. And it's time that people know that. That's the kind of man he was.
It's almost like the Larry David, episode with the anonymous donation with Ted Danson. You only did that because now everyone knows it was you, Ted. It's like, all right. So when we come back, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get one of the players from the 1969 Miracle Mets, Jerry Koosman, on the line with us to talk a little bit more about Gil Hodges. So we'll be back with Jerry Koosman right after these messages. And welcome back to WLIE 540 AM Sports Talk New York. Mark Roseman, AJ Carter, Liam the intern with you, and we are joined live in studio by Marino Amoruso, the author of the tremendous book Gil Hodges, The Quiet Man, the new commemorative edition. Now, you also do DVDs as well. I mean, you have a whole series that I saw. You have Jackie Robinson, you have Gil Hodges. So take us through how you first, the project, this started, and how you got into filmmaking.
Well, it all comes back to you're essentially you start as a writer, and but I was in college. I got into making films because I'd write something, and some of the film studios would make what I wrote. And I go, that isn't what I wrote. So I got into making films, and all those shows you talked about they're all national TV specials, and so it's a good combination of, and I get to do films, fortunately, about topics I love. I mean, who would not like to? I did a national PBS special on the Dodgers, and I got to meet Duke Snider and Pee Wee Reese, and who wouldn't do that? If you're a baseball fan, how can you not love that? And you're getting paid to do it. You're like, I'm waiting for the other foot to drop. This can't be happening. You know what I'm saying? It really was a wonderful experience. So, I've done a lot of stuff besides sports, but my passion obviously is sports and baseball, and I've gotten to do. I've done films on the Yankees, believe it or not. The Mets, the Dodgers, the Subway Series, all things that I grew up with. And my dad told me about when, he was growing up. And these players became giants to me. They became legends because I never saw them play. Then I got to meet them. I was like, oh, my God. On the outside, I'm acting professional. And on the inside, I'm going, I'm hanging out with Pee Wee Reese. This is so cool.
This is almost an unfair question.
Yeah.
So the easy one is all the players you met, who's the one who most lived up to your expectations? And second one, who's the biggest disappointment? And why?
Oh, that's a tough one. I would say that the one who most lived up to my expectations believe it or not, was Buddy Harrelson.
Okay.
Buddy looked at Gil as a father and figure, and he was I always related to him because he's a skinny little guy who played shortstop, and so was I at that time. But Buddy, I liked his style. And he was, but all of them, all the 69 Mets were, and the Dodgers, every single one of them, not only great ball players, but men of character. Erskine, LeBron, all those guys I talked to were not only excellent ball players, but they were such men of character to do what they did. A little disappointed in Tom Seaver, not in a bad way, just that he was, his very stock kind of answers, but I understand that. I mean, he's Tom Seaver. He gets asked the same question 800 times.
So there was a time I was hanging around writers, because back into the late 70s, And the writer who most lived my expectation I love is E.L. Doctorow. And the one who totally disappointed me was Kurt Vonnegut. And after that, I was totally unable to read anything Vonnegut wrote on a personal end. So I don't know. I guess, Seaver, you understood, but there's nobody like that who was so turned off by that you said, I want him to strike out every time or be bombed every time he either hits or pitches.
It's funny, though. You don't understand. It's hard for a person to understand. When I started in the TV business, I used to do pregame shows with Mickey Mantle. And it was like, if we would have went out for lunch, we used to get lunch in the hotel most of the time because he could not walk out on the street. It was like walking down the street with the Beatles. He couldn't walk a block. It took us an hour and a half to walk a block. And how do you live life like that? I mean, the guy could not stick his head out the door. And I'm not talking about kids. I'm talking about like 40, 50-year-old men in suits running, Mickey. And we couldn't get to we couldn't eat. Everybody would bother him. So usually when we did these pregame segments, we would, do them in the hotel just not to. And I would say to myself, it's so tough to live life like that. And I guess to a certain extent in New York, that's what Seaver's life was like. And so I could understand how difficult it is and getting asked so many questions and getting asked the same questions all the time. So it wasn't he was a nice man, very polite, but wasn't as heartfelt as some of the other players who almost brought to tears talking about Gil,
Was your dad? Did he get to read this book when it first came out?
Yes, he got to read the hardcover before he passed away. Yeah.
And what was his reaction to the book?
He said, "Why do you call me your old man?" I said, "Well, that's kind of a literary thing, Dad. Kind of sounds cool. I'm not that old." No, he was very, very proud. He was, in fact, half of the free authors copies that I got when it first came out in hardcover ended up in my dad giving them away to everybody he knows. So it was nice.
So what is the process that makes you decide 20 years later to bring the book back out again?
Well, it got to the point where after the Ron Santo got in last year, I was very, very upset by that. And Mrs. Hodges' reaction to it, she was in tears. And I said, you know what? It's time that I reveal some of the stuff that I know that I've never revealed about the Veterans Committee, because everybody has since passed away anyway. And I said, it's time. It's just time. And maybe by doing this 40 years later, we have this one last shot of Gil getting what he deserves more than anybody else.
Speaking of time,
what we want to do also is we want to bring in a player that played for him, and feel free to ask any questions as well, Marino. Joining us now is a man who posted a 17-9 record with a 2.2 ERA, 180 strikeouts in 1969. He holds a perfect 4-0 postseason record. He ended his career with a 222 and 209 record, struck out 2,556 batters. He's third. He has the third most wins in Met history, 140, behind only Tom Seaver and Dwight Gooden. And more importantly, this is, if we were still doing trivia, this is a great trivia question. He has a direct link to the Mets' only 2 championships, as on 1969, he was standing on the mound for the final out, and the man he was traded for, Jesse Orosco, was standing on the mound for the last out in the 1986 World Series. So it is our pleasure, all right, to welcome what was actually my favorite pitcher on that 69 staff, as well as my dad's, the lefty, number 36, Jerry Koosman. Welcome, Jerry.
Well, thank you very much.
So you're around the 101-loss New York Met team of 1967 for 9 games. The next season is 1968. It's Gil's first as a manager of the Mets. What do you remember about the difference in atmosphere from your call-up in 67 of that awful team and 1968, the first one under Gil?
Well, in 1967, I made the club. Seaver and I made the club from spring training. And that's when we had, we'd go north with 28 guys, and you had to cut 3 after 30 days. So Greg Goosen, Ralph Terry, and myself were cut. And I went to Jacksonville, Florida, and played AAA ball down there, and then was called up the last month. And there was, I don't know, I know there was some changes at the end of the season. Wes Westrom was fired, and Salty Parker, our third base coach, became the manager or interim manager. And we didn't know anything about any trades then, that they were trading Bill Dennehy and $150,000 to Washington for Gil Hodges. but later had heard about it over the winter, and there was some talk about Hawk Harrelson had written that book, and there was talk about how strict Gil Hodges was, and so we were listening to it from afar. It just sounded like we were going to be under some tough Army regiment type setting. And, of course, we were. When 1968 started, we thought that's what was going to happen, but it was altogether different. Gil was happy-go-lucky. We had a lot of fun. They, the coaches would hit balls at each other. Gil would hit balls at the coaches, and it was just a fun, relaxing year, altogether different than from what Hawk Harrelson had written in his book. But then in 1969, all changed. He got his team together, and strictness started.
That particular, you win 19 games in a rookie. You lose out by 1 vote to the winning rookie of the year, Johnny Bench, that year. What did you learn in your rookie season from Gil about being a major leaguer?
Well, Gil gave you the ball, and we went over a lot. Gil was really big in basics. He didn't like trick plays. He didn't like hook slides and whatever going in the second. He said the fastest way to second base is a straight line. It's always slide straight into the bag, for example. And it was the same thing, covering first. Learn how to cover first and do it the same way all the time, which you don't see much of that today. I watch pitchers cover first, and they don't do it correctly most of the time. But it was all that kind of stuff. We learned that. He wanted us, I remember he took all the pitchers over to another field there at Huggins Stengel Field in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I said, this is how we want you to bunt. And he had white lines up the first base line for, a third of the way, and the third base line for a third of the way, and a little circle around in front of home plate. He said, well, when you bunt the ball, keep it inside these white lines. And we practiced bunting and bunting and bunting over and over. And he says, I don't care how you used to bunt or who taught you what. He says, here's how we're going to bunt. And we all started. He showed us how he wanted us to bunt, and that's the way we did it. Everything was very basic. And he said, if you play basic baseball, we're going to win a lot of those in-between games, just playing basic baseball, doing those things correct. And so 1969 started off that way. He was strict, be on time. If you screw up, you find yourself. And so that's the way it went.
We made mention a little bit about this. Marino mentioned this. July 30th, 1969. It's a date that most Met fans probably doesn't pop into their head right away. It's a day which the Mets played a doubleheader against the Astros. You pitched the first game. The Mets lost that game 16-3. The second game, the Mets are down 7-0 in the third inning. In the second game, when Johnny Edwards hits a double to left field to Cleon Jones. At that point, the score becomes 8-0. Now, I don't know, what players did back then. I don't really recall because, there wasn't so much shots of the dugout. After that first game, were you in the clubhouse? Were you in the dugout? And do you remember what happened that particular day when Gil went out to left field to take Cleon out of the game?
That doubleheader you're talking about, was that in New York?
Yeah, that was the one where they took Cleon Jones, and when he walked out because he felt that Cleon wasn't hustling.
Okay. Yeah, I don't remember the scores that you mentioned. I mean, those scores are embarrassing. Yeah, thank God I don't remember them. Yeah. But I do remember him taking Cleon out, yes.
And what was the reaction of the team? I mean, as Marino mentioned, not only was he the Mets' leading hitter, but he was the Major League Baseball's leading hitter at the time.
Well, that's the way Gil started the year off, managing the strict. And when he went to take Cleon out, he went out there to find out if he was hurt or if he was, lackadaisical going after the ball. And we learned this later, but Gil didn't like I said, his things were basics. You hustle, you give 100%. And when he brought Cleon in, we didn't know if Cleon was hurt or if he took him out for lack of hustle. And we found out later Cleon wasn't hurt, so we knew then why Gil took Cleon out. But that's the way Gil was. You be ready when it's your turn, you give 100%, and that's all he would put up with.
So do you think that, this is AJ, Jerry, do you think that if he were managing today, given today's player, he could get away with that today?
I think today a lot of the players would quit.
You know what? He'd be taking a walk out to every inning probably as well.
Hey, Jess.
Well, there'd be a lot of fines, and I imagine there'd be a lot of grievances filed with the Players Association.
Jerry, hey, this is Marino. How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Good. One thing you told me, which was I found true with everybody I interviewed, was Gil. It didn't matter if he was the 25th man on the roster or the star player. He treated everybody the same. And I think that was a very, very important thing on that team.
Yep. If Seaver was late for a plane a minute, he'd have to get another flight because the door shut at exactly the time we were supposed to leave, and he didn't care who was late. There's no such thing as being late. You better be early because we're leaving on time all the time, for instance, you know.
Did I think Gil actually had an influence on all you guys, not only as ball players, but as people, about how you conducted your lives and how you went about your business even off the field. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. Gil, I remember a meeting Gil had in the clubhouse early on, and he says, if you're happy at home, you're going to be happy on the baseball field. If there's something going on at home that isn't right, fix it, because you got to be happy at home first. That's your family. You take care of them. You stand up. You be a respectable person. And he really instilled that in us to make sure that our family came first, and all of our families came first, and things had to be right at home. And make sure they're right at home. If they're not right at home, then let's talk about it. But that came first, and then on the field came second. And, of course, things had to be right on the field, too.
Yeah, of course. But I think that helped you have the respect you guys had for Gil, because he understood the priorities in life in terms of a game is just a game. And it's not that it's not important, but your family and your wife and your kids come first, and that's the way Gil lived his life, and I think he passed it on to you guys, and that engendered a respect that you guys had for him, for Gil, and made you want to perform for him, right?
Very much so. As time went on, we found out just how much of a great family man Gil was and how much he thought of his family. And I'm pretty sure that he talked to Joan or one of his family members every day from the clubhouse prior to the game. And, he, like I said, family comes first, and he respected and acknowledged all of our family members whenever they're around. But he also had strict rules. There was no wives or family members flying with you on the team plane. And but what if they did come out? You paid their way. Was known. You obeyed curfew, because if you missed curfew and there was an emergency at home, he wanted to be able to know where you were all the time. And if there was an emergency at home and he had to call your room and you weren't in after curfew, there was you knew you were going to get called on the carpet big time.
It's so interesting because it's so many years after his passing, and I've had the great fortune to go the last 2 years to Met Fantasy Camp, where there are a lot of guys from the 69 team, as well as Joe Pignatano, the coach. And to a man, they all, it's more than just a manager-player relationship. It's the human being relationship, and almost like a father figure. You played for a number of Major League managers in your 19-year career. Yogi Berra, Roy McMillan, Joe Frazier, Joe Torre, Gene Mach, Tony La Russa, and Paul Owens, to name a few. And in there are quite a few great baseball minds. What sets Gil apart from those guys that, to a man, every guy you speak to has such reverence for Gil?
Gil, I'll try to explain it the best of my ability. Gil was a kind of a silent manager. He never discussed anything with the players. He knew what everybody's talent was, so he never asked any of us to do anything beyond what he thought we could handle. And if he brought someone in with bases loaded to pitch, he thought they could get him out. If he put someone in to pinch hit, to do a hit and run or something like that, he thought they could do it. If he didn't think they could do it, he would pinch hit for him, or he'd take the pitcher out. Gil knew the talent of each and every one of us. And he never, if he discussed any moves with anybody, it was only Rube Walker. But he was, like I say, the silent manager. You didn't know exactly what he was doing, but after a while, you knew he was 3 steps ahead of the opposing manager.
You know, Jerry, I'm going to ask you actually the same question I spent a lot of time talking with Marino about. If Gil had not died so early, do you think he would be in the Hall of Fame by now?
Well, yeah, I do. Gil was in the process. You know, he was just there a short time, a little over 2 years as a manager, 3 years. But he was in the process of really getting that organization lined up the way it should be, the Dodger way. The Dodgers are, their organization is just solid inside out, from the minor leagues all the way to the top. And that's because they teach the basics of baseball. They've never gotten off that track. I can't speak for salaries. Salaries have, just kind of went awry in a way. But Gil, had he not passed away, that organization would have been strong and stayed strong for years, because he had the strength built up and was building it up through the minor league system all the way to the big leagues.
April 2nd, 1972 is a date that I'm sure every player that was a member of the Mets probably knows exactly where they were. I know that to this day that particular moment still haunts Joe Pignatano. Do you know where you were and who told you of Gil's passing?
Absolutely, I know where I was. I was still down there. We had just went on strike, and all the players had went home except for myself. And I stayed back with the coaches and Gil. And that day was my second day after pitching, and I was supposed to throw on the side. And Gil and the coaches were golfing next door there in West Palm Beach, where Jack Sanford was a pro. Jack Sanford being the pitcher that played the Giants. And anyway, it was my day to throw it. I didn't have anybody to throw to catch me. So I walked over there. It wasn't probably a block, and I could get to the 9th hole. And I knew when they were going to be there. And so when they came to the 9th green, I went to go talk to Rube about somebody catching me. Well, at that time, the rules were strict. They weren't allowed to talk. The manager and coaches weren't allowed to talk to the players. And so I asked Rube, and Rube says, "Hey, I'm not allowed to talk to you." I said, "Well, I need somebody to throw to. I don't know who to throw to. It's my day to throw." He said, "Why don't you get a glove off and the balls off the back of the equipment truck and go throw up against the back of the hotel wall?" So that's what I did. I walked away. I left them on the green, and I didn't talk to anybody else. I didn't talk to Gil or anybody. So I went and, well, I'll just leave it at that. That's what I did. Went, got the balls and the glove, and I was walking through the pool area, and I can't think of his name right now. One of the football players for the Vikings was sitting there, and he reckoned. He said, "What are you going to do?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, I was a catcher. I'll catch you." So I went and got a catcher's mitt, and he caught me in the back of the hotel until I started hitting him on the knees and the shoulders. And Jack Sanford was over in the pro shop, or not the starter's shack. He saw it. He came over there, felt sorry for this football player, and Jack Sanford finished warming me up. And when I got through throwing, I put the equipment back in the truck. I went up to my room. I showered. When I came out of the shower, I heard the ambulance. And, of course, I didn't know what it was for or who was involved. I got dressed. I went downstairs, and Red Foley was down there, was a writer with the New York Times or Daily News at the time. And he says, did you hear what happened? I says, no, I didn't. He said, well, ambulance came and took Gil to the hospital. And I says, really? I said, well, I want to go see what's wrong. So he says, well, you mind if I go with you? I says, no. So we caught a cab, and we went to the hospital. And when I got there, I said, I'd like to see Gil Hodges. And then someone says, well, here, follow me. And they took me into a room nearby where all the coaches were and some of the people with the Mets organization. I walked in there, and everything was really quiet and somber. And I walked up to Artie Friedman, who was a statistician. I says, Artie, what's happened? How's Gil? And he wouldn't talk to me. And then I walked over to Rube Walker, and I says, Rube, how's Gil? And Rube says, Gil's dead. And it was just like you got hit over the head with a 2x4. It was just unbelievably shocking.
Jerry Koosman talking about the passing of Gil Hodges. We will be back after these messages. If you're just tuning in, you have missed a hell of a show, and you're tuning in way too late. We had tremendous stuff talking about Gil Hodges with Marino Amoruso, who is live in studio, who, during the break, I found out, did was it a movie or a book on hockey?
I did a film many years ago called Pride of the Island.
Even though I'm a Ranger fan, I'm going to get that.
Yeah, I'm a Ranger fan, too. I grew up as a Ranger fan, even though I knew all the Islander guys very well because they practiced at my dad's ice rink when they first started.
Which is right down the block from
Right.
AJ and my house.
Right.
Believe it
But
or
I
not.
was still, a Ranger fan. Once you're a fan, you're a fan. You root for the
Absolutely.
laundry. But they were nice guys, and
Is that still available on?
it's around. You could probably get it on Amazon and eBay and stuff.
I'm
but
definitely-
I did it a number of years ago, and having been an ex-hockey player, and I worked out with those guys when I was a kid.
Was that the North American Hockey League when Al Barron owned the Ducks?
Oh God, we had season tickets to the Ducks. I loved those games. Oh, that would turn me on to hockey. I mean, the Long
Now
Island.
that
that
would
was
be a
a-
great DVD.
On the Ducks?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. My first coach, the reason I ended up playing junior and played a little professional, was my two coaches were Norm Ryder
Okay.
and John Brophy.
Oh,
And they taught you
you
how to
played under
Now-
Brophy?
4 years.
Oh wow! Now talk about a tough guy.
Oh my
Talk
God.
about it, no
I'll tell you
nonsense.
what, though.
Wow.
He told me how to win a face-off. Little things. I never lost a face-off in junior hockey. The guy knew hockey. I mean, maybe he was an NHL caliber player, but the guy knew his hockey, and he took a bunch of young kids from Long Island, and we ended up playing national championships.
Brophy might have known hockey and face-offs. He didn't know his way around marriage too well. I think he's on marriage
He wasn't
number
a real good
7.
driver either, yeah.
So in wrapping up, let's go and ask you what your favorite Gil Hodges story would be.
Oh my God! I think, believe it or not, I found out when he was 19 years old, he won a Bronze Star for valor in the Battle of Okinawa, and nobody really knew what he did
At 19.
At 19 years old, and I found out that what he did as a corporal, in terms of protecting documents, fighting off the Japanese under air attack. Just phenomenal, and he never said a word about it to anybody, and that just typified Gil Hodges. Joan told me that they were married 5 years before she even knew he had been awarded a Bronze Star for bravery in Okinawa. She didn't even know. She got a phone call. Some guy was doing an article about players who won awards. She said, that's the first time I found out I was married to the man 5 years. And that kind of typifies Gil Hodges, that he didn't say anything. He just did what his duty was.
So in this age of social media, Facebook, Twitter, where people can get Betty White to host Saturday Night Live,
Right.
how can we use social media to get Gil Hodges into the Hall of Fame?
I think everybody find out who the members of the Golden Committee are. It's Thomas Sawyer and Ralph Kine. It's on the Hall of Fame website, and get to them any way you can. and be a little indignant about it. It's about time. It's about time. This man deserves to be Hall of Famer. He is, and I say this in the book, he symbolizes what the Hall of Fame is all about. He is I hate to use this word, poster child for the Hall of Fame. He is what the Hall of Fame is about. And we see what's happening in baseball today. The three greatest role models in baseball history: Jackie Robinson, Lou Gehrig, Gil Hodges.
So where do you stand on Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame?
You know, when you look at it now compared to what's going on, it's like it's not much. You know, I mean, he didn't do that. You know, I think it's time that they let him in. He's paid the price.
And do you think these guys, you know, the Clemens of the world, the McGuires, the Bonds, is there ever going to be a time where you can see them getting elected to the Hall of Fame?
Personally, I would not like to see it, but I think eventually, as time passes, we have very short memories in this country, and they'll eventually get in. But the writers or whoever are going to punish them for a while, and and after a few years, as the writers turn over, generations change. They'll eventually get in. I personally would not like to see that unless they have a little needle next to their plaque.
I have to also commend you because I would imagine that it gets very frustrating. Your passion is there, and year after year, it's almost like you're getting beaten down. And I have to commend you because you are out there fighting, and it's a good fight. It's the right fight. It's everything. If you read this book, you realize that Gil Hodges was and is everything that's right about the game of baseball and as a human being. So I applaud you for that. And I'm really thrilled that you were able to come in and sit in with us tonight, and we got to, dedicated a nice portion of time to Gil Hodges. So I appreciate it. We want everyone to go out to his website, check it out on our Wall of Fame. If you just tuned in, go out tomorrow. The entire archive show will be on, as well as a podcast of Marino with Gil Hodges. So we appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I had a great time.
It was great. All right. So we'll see everyone next week when our subject will be social media. Maybe we can get Jay Horowitz to tweet about Gil Hodges because Jay is going to be our guest next week. So we'll see everyone next week. Have a great one, everybody.